Well, hello and welcome to a conversation on the Sandbox Cooperative Podcast with renowned author and teacher John Philip Newell, and we're here in the Looking Within Center in Rochester, Minnesota. John Philip is joining us from Edinburgh, Scotland. We have some friends joining us here in person and some online, and many more will encounter this conversation in the weeks and months to come. But wherever you are joining us from, we're so glad that you are here. For a word about the Looking Within Center, where we're seated, I introduce its director, Julie Stevens.
Thanks, Dave. Good morning, everyone. Welcome again to the Looking Within Center. It's so nice to welcome to John Philip and to all of you here in the room and watching us. We're so pleased to co-host this event and to collaborate with Sandbox Cooperative. And this fits the Looking Within Center so well with our mission of providing a lens to see Christ in all things and all people, and the vision of a world transformed from the inside out. So this just fits that so well. One final comment is we have a new website. It's at lookingwithincenter.com. It, of course, shows our in-person sessions and events, but it also has a very robust, and we'll hope to populate even more, digital section. Just as a hub people can come back to with lots of recordings and things to help on the contemplative spiritual journey. And that's one of the places you'll find the recording of the podcast today. So lookingwithincenter.com. And again, welcome.
Thanks, Julie. My name is Dave Berg, and this is my co-host, Chris Roberts. The Sandbox Cooperative is a podcast and speaker series that we've been at it for about the last decade or so. And we have a mission to knock down walls of division with curiosity and conversation. And we're so excited to continue this work today. And so let's get to it, shall we?
Yeah, so today our guest is John Philip Newell. He's a Celtic teacher and award-winning author of spirituality whose work calls the modern world to reawaken the sacredness of earth and every human being. When we last talked with John Philip, I believe just a couple years ago, it was about his book, Sacred Earth, Sacred Soul. And today we're talking about his latest work, The Great Search, where he explores the great spiritual yearnings of humanity today in the context of the decline of religion as we have known it. He has been described as having the heart of a Celtic bard and the mind of a Celtic scholar. His teachings bring together the poetic and the intellectual, the head and the heart. His writings, which share a spiritual awareness as well as political and ecological concern, have been translated into 7 languages.
I have personally just been blessed by his writing and his Celtic wisdom workshops, which he offers at various retreat centers around the United States and Canada. But for now, I'm mostly excited to have a conversation about this remarkable new book.
So a little bit about today. We'll begin our conversation with John Philip soon, but as we go, if you have any questions, feel free to add them in the chat of the event page on YouTube if you're watching online. We've got someone monitoring the chat so we can bring the questions up as they rise. And for those of you, again, who are in the room today, please write down questions on a card, hand them to Julie, and she'll bring them up to us so that we can ask them. Again, welcome to our conversation today. And for now, John Philip Newell, welcome.
Yeah. Now's the part where you can applaud. John Philip, thank you so much for joining us. And thank you for this latest book, The Great Search, Turning to Earth and Soul in the Quest for Healing and Home. Shares 9 different teachers, various traditions, backgrounds, eras, and what their story and lives might have to say about our spiritual quest and reality today. So John Philip, I would love to hear more from you on this. Just as we get started, I read so many of your books, and to me, this one somehow feels a little bit different from the others in that it feels intensely personal in the way that you share your personal spiritual journey and your insights that are leading you in this moment. I'm thinking specifically of the way that you've been moved beyond your status as an ordained pastor. Feels like an acknowledgement of a spiritual evolution. And I'm just wondering if you could speak to this and anything else by way of introduction to yourself in this new book.
Thank you, Dave and Chris. Very good to be with you and with those that I can't see on the screen. Yes, this book belongs deeply, I think, to this moment in time. I have been aware for some years of a growing diaspora or a type of religious exile for countless numbers of our brothers and sisters, hundreds of thousands, I suppose millions of our brothers and sisters who began life within the four walls of religious institutions are no longer there. And why not? And this book sets out to ask, what are we yearning for? Both those who have left the four walls, but also those who remain faithful to trying to live within the four walls, but are realizing that we need more than what has been on offer religiously. So it's a book that belongs to this time of religious exile and paying attention to the yearnings. So it's a book about that aspect of today. But it is, as you rightly indicate, Dave, it is a book that deeply reflects also my own journey. So in 2018, I relinquished my ordination as a Christian minister. I felt I could no longer hold together the focus on sacredness of earth and sacredness of every human being, which has been very much at the heart of my teaching. I felt I couldn't hold it together with the creeds, doctrines, formulations of belief that come down to us from the 4th century onwards in the Christian tradition, from the Nicene Creed, for instance, in the 4th century, that critical moment in Christianity when our religion got into bed with empire. And we need to ask all sorts of questions about what was happening in that sort of marriage between power and religion. So in that sense, it's a book about this moment in time, but it's a book that sort of deeply reflects what my own journey is. I was asked not too long ago on Iona by one of our pilgrims to speak a little bit about why I relinquished my ordination. And after I spoke about it, she said, "Oh, you gave your ordination back," and I think in many ways that's a better phrase than relinquishing. It was like it doesn't fit. I need to give it back, and that decision was taken very much in terms of my own integrity as a teacher to realize and to make it clear that what I'm teaching is not in line with the creeds and doctrines that have come down to us in Western Christianity. But I want to make it very clear, I have not lost my faith. I'm not relinquishing my ordination because I've lost my faith. I believe that the decision to give back my ordination was me following my sense of faithfulness to the sacredness of earth and every human being. And yes, one of the things that I've been very aware of over the last couple of years is that within our Judeo-Christian inheritance, including in our scriptures, there's a very creative tension, not always a comfortable tension, but there's a creative tension between the priestly and the prophetic, or between the temple and the wilderness. And I'm emphatically speaking more from the wilderness these days than from the temple, as it were. But one of the things that I deeply believe about a true prophetic voice, or an attempt to be part of that aspect of our inheritance, is that the prophetic voice, if it is a true voice, speaks with love. So it is a voice that speaks for love for the family that is in the temple, as it were. This is my inheritance. I'm grateful to be a son of the Christian household. So as I speak from the wilderness, my prayer is that I may be serving the household, both those who continue to gather in the temple, as it were, and those who are searching for more in the wilderness.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. So this new book, it's called The Great Search, Turning to Earth and Soul in the Quest for Healing and Home. Tell us a little bit about, you talked about the kind of diaspora of all these people who have been part of maybe a church and religious institution in the past, and now they're not finding themselves there. So obviously that's a piece of it. But tell us a bit about this great search. What are we looking for? How would you define this idea to a new person?
As I say in the introduction, I quote from that young Jewish writer, philosopher Simone Weil, who managed to escape Paris just briefly before the Nazi occupation of her homeland, but who then died tragically before the end of the war. But one of Simone's phrases has meant a lot to me over the years, and the phrase is what she calls the efficacy of desire, the efficacy of desire. And by that she means that getting in touch with the deepest yearnings of our being, getting in touch with the yearnings of our soul made of God, this is efficacious. That is, it helps bring about what we are longing for. It brings up into consciousness the yearnings that are deep within us. And then from consciousness, we can more readily apply these and live these and realize these in our lives and interrelationships. So the 9 chapters of the book, and in each chapter I draw from a great prophetic voice from different parts of the world, different spiritual traditions. The 9 chapters are looking at what I believe are the 9 great yearnings of this moment in time. And most of the yearnings relate to our yearning to come back into true relationship with Earth and longing to come back into true relationship with our own depths made of God.
So you have lifted up these 9 authors and thinkers from all these different traditions and backgrounds, and they've in a sense left us breadcrumbs to mark the path as we embark on this great search. How did you choose these 9 specific people, and is there anyone else that you didn't quite make the cut that you would lift up as well?
Yeah, well, I think all of these prophetic teachers have been important to me over the years. So as I began to reflect on what are the great yearnings of this moment in time, then I looked to, well, who might be addressing that yearning. So the yearning for vision, for instance, chapter 1, I immediately went to someone who's been important to me. I've been reading him for many years, Thomas Berry, the eco-theologian. I mean, he was a theologian, but he preferred often just to call himself a geologian because his focus is so much on sacredness of Earth. And so I saw in Thomas Berry someone who is nurturing our vision of the sacred way beyond the bounds that we have tried to place on sacredness in our religion and so much of our culture. So he really sees everything in the universe as both spiritual and physical, and that has been the case since the great flaring forth of light at the beginning of time. And he is inviting us into a type of spiritual relationship with everything in the universe, as well as a physical relationship. So with each yearning, I thought, well, who is it that can address this yearning? And one of the interesting things about all these 9 prophetic figures is that in their own time, in their own era, none of them were particularly considered orthodox. They were all considered slightly heretical or way out on the edge. But here they are now, addressing the heart of the yearnings of the human soul for today. And I was saying to Dave before we began the recording that one of the delights for me has been to work closely with these great prophetic voices, and I have been so deeply blessed by each one of them, and that means that the writing of the book, yes, it's work, it's sort of concentrated effort, but I've been deeply blessed by each one of them, and that enables me to hope that therefore this book might be a blessing to others as well. This is again and again these teachers are inviting us to find our sense of home address deep in relationship to earth and all life forms, and to find our home address also deep within ourselves, and to know that our soul and Earth's soul are essentially one. And this is the type of nurturing of our vision that I believe we need at this moment in time, because the very future of humanity is in doubt if we don't come back into true relationship with Earth and the true spiritual essence of one another.
Well, thanks. I couldn't tell, Chris, if you had a question.
Go for it.
When you were talking about each one of these authors being viewed as heretics in their own time, and sometimes I've heard it said that a heretic is just somebody who speaks the truth too soon.
Very good.
But I'm as I'm thinking about this latest book through the lens of some of your other teachings around Celtic spirituality. You've written about the Celtic understanding of deep knowing, the sense that we've already had this deep and profound knowing about the mysteries of the universe. And in this book, you seem to draw on that idea of deep knowing beyond the dogmatic formulas of our religious inheritance, that the whole thing is bigger than ourselves, and that we are thoroughly interconnected and unified as one. We are one with everything else. Is this understanding of deep knowing a kind of compass for the great search? If so, how?
Yeah, I think that's a good way to put it. Certainly, that was that theme was to the fore in Sacred Earth, Sacred Soul, my previous book, and I tell the story in that book of giving a talk in Virginia years ago. It was shortly after Listening for the Heartbeat of God was published. And in it I speak about what is deepest in us being of God rather than what is deepest in us being opposed to God, which is, of course, what the doctrine of original sin has been used to teach. And I was speaking about when we look into the face of a newborn child, we're looking into the face of God, freshly born among us. And in attendance that night was a woman, I think, in her 80s, and at the end of the evening, she came very purposefully up the central aisle of the church with a copy of Listening for the Heartbeat of God in her hand. And she was walking up the aisle so purposefully that the naughty boy in me thought, she's going to hit me over the head with that book. And I was quite wrong, thank God. She, when she got up to the front, she opened the book and said, I want to show you what I wrote in this book when I read it. And inside she had written, I knew it, I knew it, I knew it. And I so often wish I had asked her for that copy, because she had said so simply, so succinctly, what our experience is when we hear wisdom. It may never have been taught to us before, we may have never heard it, but when we do hear it, our deep response is, I knew it. This is true. My soul knows that this is true. And if I had thought to ask her for that copy, I believe it would still be with me, and it would be with me every time I write, every time I teach, because I believe that in offering teachings and also in relationship with one another, we should never think that any of the truths that we can give utterance to, we should never think that they are not already essentially in the heart of the listener. So our role for one another and the role as a teacher, I believe, is to simply liberate or to awaken a wisdom, a divine wisdom that is our birthright. As the wisdom literature in the Hebrew scriptures say, wisdom was born with us in our mother's womb. So and then sort of as the Celtic tradition goes on to say, and we suffer from soul forgetfulness. We've forgotten who we are. We've forgotten the true essence of every life form and of earth. So any great teaching, I believe, and that's certainly the case for these 9 great teachers, their words of wisdom are awakening us to what I believe the soul already knows at a deep level. So that allows us, in a sense, to be liberators of what is in the heart of one another, rather than thinking that what we have to offer is somehow foreign to the heart or to the true soul of the listener or the other. And that's a very different way of teaching. Because we've often, especially in Western Christianity, we've had something of a sort of sense of hierarchy of truth almost being dispensed to us from above. And I emphatically don't believe that is the way of accessing wisdom. I think it's about reading, listening, being in conversation in ways that allow the wisdom that was fashioned by God into our soul comes forth into new awareness, and with that awareness, new challenge to live this truth, to embody it in our lives and into relationships.
So as you're talking about this sense of knowing and the idea of uncovering the truth that we all know, right? As I'm thinking about that, one of your chapters, you talk about Nan Shepherd and her love and knowing of the mountains in Scotland and in the Scottish Highlands. And what I found fascinating as I read that chapter for the first time was the way that you describe kind of her change in perspective of the mountains. At first, it's sort of a, wow, these mountains are incredible. Look at how high they are. And she talks. You describe her talking about the way that it affects her. And then over time, as she spends more and more time in the mountains, she begins to learn and discover things not only about the mountains but about herself through this experience. And ultimately, it allows those experiences to sort of instruct her spirit into who and how she is, right? And I'm curious if you could share. Sometimes I think when we talk about this deep knowing, it's hard to make it tangible. It feels fairly abstract in some sense. I'm curious if you could share an experience or a story of a time where you felt this sort of connection and knowing, where you've kind of spent enough time in and around a piece of nature or with a person where that sense of knowing has become present for you.
Yeah. Well, just to pick up first of all on Nan Shepherd, and it's been a delight for me to include in these 9 great prophetic teachers. It's been a delight to slip into 2 Scots, and yeah, I think Nan Shepherd will not be known by everyone outside of Scotland, but she's certainly being celebrated now in Scotland. In fact, she appears on our Scottish £5 note. She's the first woman poet writer to appear on a Scottish £5 note, and she's being celebrated by ecologists, feminists, spiritual writers, theologians, and so on. Part of what Nan says in relation to the mountain, and she has this sort of lifelong relationship, and she describes it really as a love affair with the mountain. And she allows the mountain to become like a metaphor for the body of earth. And the knowing that she describes in her book is not just a head knowing, it's a body knowing, It's a knowing with our entire being. And I think to apply that personally in my own life, I realized looking back on my early years as a boy growing up in Canada. My mother was Scottish and my father was Irish, but I was born in Canada. And I always felt most deeply at home, as it were, and a type of deep peace or a sense of connection when I was in nature. And I had the gift of spending many, many summers up in the northern lakes of Ontario. But there was nothing in my religious tradition, as beautiful as it was in many ways. It was an evangelical tradition that's never been where I have been in terms of my self-understanding and self-description. But it does have a very strong emphasis on heart knowing or heart connection. So I'll always be grateful for that upbringing. But there was nothing in that religious upbringing that gave me language for what my experience of nature was. And it wasn't until I came to Scotland to study theology and met George MacLeod, the founder of the modern day Iona community, who accessed a type of lineage of Celtic wisdom that stretches right back to the 2nd century. And as I delved into some of the poetry and poems of the people of the Western Isles of Scotland, for me that was like a waking up. And it provided me with a language. These prayers that were uttered at the rising of the sun or at the setting of the sun, or prayers that were intoned at the birth of a child or the death of a loved one, or prayers that were recited as the fire was being kindled in the fireplace in the morning, or when it was being smeared or covered at night. These prayers that belong so much to the realm of the natural and nature rather than being formally or explicitly religious in context. These words provided language for what my experience had been. And so in that sense it was a real sort of waking up through accessing a spiritual wisdom that had been passed down. But in my own sort of religious inheritance, there had been a disconnect with earth. And so it was finding language in another tradition that helped me make sense of what my boyhood experiences were.
And that, to me, feels like, and I could be wrong on this, a combination of that knowing that we talked about earlier, but also this idea of incarnation, an incarnational spirituality, and it's a theme that I see through the whole book. I often will think about the quote from the 12th century mystic Meister Eckhart, who said, "What good is it if if Christ was born 1,000 years ago and doesn't continue to be born today. And it's that idea that the incarnation didn't just happen once, but it happens all the time, everywhere, and you could experience it in Ontario as a boy or Nan Shepherd at the mountain. And this theme is again woven throughout the whole book. At one point you wrote, and this is in the Edwin Muir section in page 176, immortality is something that we can know within us, the shining of an eternal presence. Incarnation is something we can witness in one another and in everything that has being, the sacred essence of every person and of every creature. And at that point you dropped the mic, because that was an incredible quote. So what is it about this more expansive understanding of incarnation that will help us in this great search?
Yeah. Right at the heart of our Christian inheritance is the celebration of incarnation of God born in the flesh. And yet, what have we done with this sort of radical doctrine of incarnation? We've ended up saying it applies to one person in one place, in one time, namely Jesus and his life. And instead of seeing that the incarnation story of Jesus is not an exception to humanity, it should be seen as a revelation of what is true of every place, every person, every time. And the story of the song of Emmanuel that has echoed within the four walls of our Christian tradition for centuries, this needs to be released, in a sense, to be allowed to be a song that celebrates the withinness of the divine in every life form, every person, every moment. And it has big implications, of course, for how we view ourselves, how we view one another, how we view Earth and all its creatures, and it calls us, I believe, into a depth of faithful relationship with one another, and not us somehow looking to the withinness of God in Jesus that is an exception to the universe, but looking to Jesus and the story of incarnation in Jesus that leads us to look for that and expect it deep within ourselves and within all things. And chapter 3, seeking presence, seeking a real sense of the presence of the divine in every encounter, every moment. And I draw from the great Jewish teacher Martin Buber in chapter 3. And I so love what Martin Buber has to say. He says, I don't believe in Jesus, I believe with Jesus. And he one of the things that's very clear in Buber's life and Buber's teaching is that he addresses our yearning to know God, not just to know about God. It's not a matter of sort of signing up to certain propositions about the divine. It's more, how do we release in one another and in ourselves a continuous and ongoing knowing of the divine in the rising of the sun every day, in our sort of gift of every breath, in the light that we see in one another's eyes, in the goodness that we taste in the fruit of the earth. These are all expressions of the divine. And it's very beautiful to see someone like Martin Buber see Jesus as a type of revelation of the I-thou relationship that he's calling us into, with the thou, the eternal thou, at the heart of every human being and every life form.
it's with regard to the incarnational understanding. There's this understanding among scientists that the carbon, the nitrogen, oxygen atoms in our bodies, along with the atoms of all of the other heavy elements, were created in previous generations of stars 4.5 billion years ago. So we are made of the same stuff as the stars and everything else around us. And so in your book, you quote Julian of 14th century mystic Julian of Norwich, saying, "We are not simply made by God, we are made of God." You tell us about Nan Shepherd, who says that all of creation is on fire with the divine light, the same divine light. You tell us about Carl Jung, who understood that he and every other being is a splinter of the divine. So from science to philosophy to psychology, there's this convergence of human thought in multiple fields. And do you see this as essential to the Great Search and a part of that incarnational understanding?
Yes, absolutely. I think part of what we're longing for, and this is true of these 9 great teachers, is a more unitive way of seeing. So every great discipline of thought and study at this moment in time is inviting us to back into true relationship with Earth, is saying that Earth holds wisdom that we need for our very survival to be in true relationship with, and it's to see not the sort of divide between spirit and matter, or between heaven and earth, the divine and the human, that's characterized a lot of our philosophical, cultural, and religious history, but to see these as interwoven dimensions of our one being and of Earth's one being. So it's very it's an exciting moment in time to see the way new science is in many ways pointing to what the great spiritual traditions have known, and to see this one interrelatedness of all things, which has always been the mystic's understanding, to see the divine and the human as interwoven. And when Julian says that we're not just made by God, we're made of God, she sees us as, in that sense, coming from the very essence of the divine, and that's one of the reasons why Julian so loves to refer to God as Mother, as well as Father, because she sees us as coming out of the womb, or coming out of the essence of the divine. And one of the things I say in the conclusion is that all of these teachers are, of course, pointing us to sacredness of Earth, and this recovery of Earth awareness that we are in the midst of goes hand in hand with a recovery of woman and womanhood, and a recovery of a sense of the sacredness of the feminine. So often, what we've done to Earth is what we've done to women, in terms of subordination and including sort of abuse. And so as we come back into true relationship with Earth, I think one of the absolute features of that movement of coming back into relationship with Earth is to come back into relationship with the feminine shining of the divine. And I see this not just in women, but in men. It is men also that are being invited at this stage to get in touch with the feminine light and shinings of the divine as well.
I've kind of got a couple of questions that maybe go together, so bear with me. So I'm thinking about we were just talking about kind of the variety of disciplines that all are kind of aware of this interrelatedness and often pointing us at this moment to that sense of being connected. And I'm thinking about a couple of different things. You talk about the Sufi poet Rumi a little bit, and he talks and you share his noting that trying to name the divine is impossible. And I see this attempt, particularly within religious traditions, to, I think, at least at some point, well-intentioned, name a thing that is very powerful and beautiful, and is a lot of what you're talking about. And then I also see that in that our religious traditions can give us some really beautiful gifts to carry forward as we proceed through this great search. But I'm curious, what, in your view, we're primarily a Christian audience that's viewing today. What things do we hold that might aid us in this search? And also, why do you think every time we try to describe it, we lose something and we cause more problems than good?
Yes, the word God is of course a primal word, and it is a word that I think existed long before the advent of religion, and at best it's a metaphor. It's a way of pointing to what cannot be uttered. And one of the sort of main problems with the word God, as we've used it, is that when we use it, we think we know what we're talking about, and instead of seeing that it's always pointing way beyond anything that we can know or understand or give definition to. I think that one of the things that we as human beings love to do is to try to articulate, try to give expression, and we know this, for instance, in love, don't we? That love is beyond words; it's beyond expression. But what do lovers love to do? They love to try to give expression to this mystery of love that is coursing through them and flowing in them for one another. So let's continue to be creative, and let's continue to be imaginative in terms of trying to utter from the soul, while also having the sort of humility, radical humility, to know that no word, no image, no definition can, of course, in any sense capture the divine. And I love the story of Martin Buber being asked by a theologian in Germany, pre-war Germany. The German theologian asked him if he believed in God. And Buber said, if to believe in God means to be able to speak about God, no, I don't believe in God. But if to believe in God means to be able to speak to God, yes, I believe in God. So let's continue, of course, to express from the core of our being. And let's bring all the faculties of our being into a type of knowing the presence of the divine. And at the same time, let's keep remembering that any of the articulations or expressions of the divine that I use are not in any sense definitive or final, or the articulations of the divine that we use in our Christian tradition. We should be sort of open to learning from expressions and words for the divine that we find in other traditions as well. I mean, Thomas Berry, I quote Thomas Berry as saying that religious diversity is as important to the human soul as biodiversity is to the planet. So these great traditions are given to complete each other, not to compete with each other.
We also want to make sure that if there's any questions from the audience, that you continue to consider writing them down and letting us know. And you can hand those over to Julie if you would like to. We have there's something coming our way, but while this is an exchange of questions is happening here, it's some of what you were speaking to was this idea of experience, and again, another theme that I see throughout the whole book. The Great Search is the importance of experiencing rather than describing the divine, as you talked about with Martin Buber. It reminds me of the quote from Karl Rahner, who says, "The devout Christian of the future will either be mystic, someone who has experienced something, or will cease to be anything at all." It feels like, obviously experience is important to the Great Search and the spiritual quest, but so many traditions have a tendency to fear and avoid it, not just the Christian tradition, but it feels like others as well. Why do you think this is, and what is a step forward from that, do you think?
Yeah, I suppose a faith that is based on subscribing to certain propositional statements about God allows, I think, more distance from the divine, and therefore probably less challenge, less movement for change, less opening to inspiration, but also the demands of true relationship with the divine. So I think there's always a sort of, I suppose, a trade-off that happens. And so, let's look at what was happening in the 4th century when Christianity became the religion of empire. What was the trade-off happening there? Political power wanted religion to sort of sanction what it was doing. So, of course, what empire was wanting to do, what the Roman Empire was wanting to do, was to dominate the world, was to exploit other nations, was to not so much reverence the people even of its own empire, but dictate to the people. So this is how religion has continued to sort of sanction empire over the centuries. And I'm not just speaking about the Roman Empire in the past, I'm speaking also about the British Empire, I'm speaking about the American Empire, I'm speaking of any people who have, in a sense, set their nation up over the rest of the world and have pretended that they could be they could be strong by wronging or dominating or exploiting other nations. And again, religion has been used to sanction and to bless war and the violence of one nation against another. So propositional statements about the divine allow for, in a sense, saying that this sort of mystery is not primarily about relationship, it's not primarily about what we're being invited to do when we encounter the presence of the divine in not only someone of our nation, but at the heart of every person, every nation, even at the heart of those who seem so different from us, people who may threaten us in many ways, to see the divine even in them, and to look to try to be in relationship with that divine presence in one another and in earth. And what we end up is a very dynamic unfolding of the universe and unfolding of the divine, instead of seeing truth as entirely defined, and everything we ultimately need to know about the divine has already been revealed, it's already been stated. So I think one path can be a more convenient truth, convenient path, and the other is the inconvenience of knowing that this is about relationship, and it's about continuing to know, continuing to learn more, continuing to move into greater love and faithfulness. And so I think that's some of the distinction.
Experience and relationship and messiness. Yeah.
So we just got a few questions from our audience. So I'll start with this one. When thinking about our children, what are some things that you wish we might teach, or ways that we might teach in order to allow children to enter into this perspective? And what are some things maybe you think we should stop teaching?
Yeah, I mean, it's a wonderful thing, isn't it, that nearly every great spiritual tradition has wanted to deeply honor the child. And when Jesus says, "To such as these belongs the kingdom of God," we find parallels to that in so many of the great spiritual traditions. So what is it that the child already knows? And I think that's one of the things that we need to be much more intentional about. Instead of thinking, the child needs, the child needs to be told, propositional truths about the divine. Let's rather start with, well, what's the knowing that Jesus sees in the child, and this sort of open-eyed wonder in the child. So let's be, in a sense, led by the curiosity of the child, by the sort of open-eyed wonder of the child. Let's try to make sure that any of our sort of nurturing of the child's soul happens in a way that deeply honors the child, and knows that at deep levels in the child there's already a type of knowing, and how do we engage with that. So I think one of the things we need to let go of, not only in relation to our religious education of children, but our nurturing of one another, is to make sure that we're feeding and living in relation to that deep sacredness, that deep sacred wisdom, that deep sacred creativity, and that longing for love that are deep within every human being. And let's make sure that any of the liturgies or rituals that we use keep pointing back out to the essential sacredness of earth and the interrelatedness of earth, so that our sanctuaries, our places of gathering, our places of prayer and celebration, let's be careful to remind ourselves that these places are at best to be seen as side chapels onto the great cathedral of earth, sea and sky, and instead of ever thinking that what we do within the four walls, whether in terms of education or liturgy or practice, are somehow sort of unrelated or somehow more important than what's going on in this great mystery of the interrelationship of Earth and the universe.
Thank you. We're getting close to time, about 4 or 5 minutes. We have probably more questions than we do have time for. One of the questions, if I could summarize it, has to do with the spirituality of Native people, thinking in terms of, in our context, Native Americans, but however, different cultures have the Native folks who live in that land, and that so much of what you're talking about kind of dovetails with the Native spirituality. I know that you've done a lot of study and work there, and you reference it early on in the book, as I recall. But could you speak to how this work and this scholarship dovetails with Native spirituality?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we've already spoken of how much we need one another as spiritual traditions and religious traditions, and I would say at this moment in time we especially need to be accessing indigenous spiritual wisdom, because for all of the great indigenous traditions, there was an approaching Earth and every life form essentially as thou, to be in relationship with the trees, to be in relationship with the plants and the animals, and there are sort of native depths in of course every part of the world, and thank God we can access some of them more readily in North America and in the First Nations people of Canada. And in many ways, I would see the Celtic as a native tradition. It celebrates natos, it celebrates the natural world, it celebrates our own birth as of the divine. And but of course it's very important in that relationship of honoring and learning from native traditions, not to go the route of imitating another tradition. I love what my good friend Barbara Brown Taylor says in one of her titles. She talks about holy envy, and so how can we sort of almost sort of envy the insights of another tradition without thinking that that's what we need to become? And so many native teachers that I've worked with have said things like, don't look to us. Look deep within your own inheritance, and there you will find also a relationship with sacredness of earth is deep in every indigenous tradition. And it's fascinating, isn't it, the resonances between all these native traditions, because we can't explain the resonance in terms of cross-fertilization. These were happening in different parts of the world in sort of isolation from one another in terms of time and space. So the commonality of inspiration around sacredness of nature that comes up in these traditions, this is coming up from the inner well of the human soul. So let's pay attention to these native traditions, and as they say, allow them to lead us back more deeply into our own native roots and native origins. And I think that's an important part of the way forward.
Yeah, thank you. So I think we've got time for just one more, and I want to land with this one. So as I ask this question, I'm thinking about the chapter that you wrote on Julian of Norwich, and you talked a little bit about your son's mental health struggles. and the community of support around him in all of the ways that he was supported, but you specifically mentioned his border collie. And as I think about the ways that we can be connected with the earth around us, that for me is a piece that just totally lands. I totally understand that we see and know things through that kind of relationship that we maybe don't otherwise. But with that being said, with all of the things in the world to distract us, with all of the knowledge of the entire humanity in our pockets, what are some practices, what are some very tangible things that you might encourage us to do that are simple on a daily basis that can help us experience a little bit more of this unity with Earth?
Thank you. Yeah, concerning my Brendan and his journey with in relation to mental health, and one of the things that that beautiful border collie of his has done is to get him out into the hills every day, and I think that as someone like Shakespeare says, nature is our nurse. So most of us know this deeply, do we not? We know that the feeling of sunshine on our skins, especially when it begins to come in the early spring after our bodies have been without so much sunshine and light, we just know that we feel better for it, we know the goodness of eating a potato that's just newly dug from the earth. We just know it. So let's follow that sort of instinctive knowing, and allow these features of what we can know to be both a physical and a spiritual knowing. So the prayers in the Hebridean tradition of prayers and poetry that have come down over the centuries so often see the sun and the moon and the stars as spiritual realities, not just physical realities. And so these things that we know are good for us, and we do have a capacity to know these things instinctively. Let's pay attention to that, and to know that what is good for the body is going to be good for the soul as well. So let's make sure that we're caring for our bodies in terms of what we consume. Let's be sure that we're paying attention to the right relationship between times of stillness and times of action, times of rest and times of engagement. And one of the things I so love about all the indications of what was happening in the early Celtic Christian centuries is that they weren't worshipping inside the four walls of buildings. They were worshipping outside in the forests and in the mountains. And that's something I really love to do. And even when I'm inside, I make a point for morning meditation to be praying in relation to the rising of the sun in the east. I try to make sure whenever possible that I can literally see the sun and its rising in the new light of the morning, or at these liminal places in the natural world, like the meeting of the sea and the land. Let's, when possible, go to those places, as was the custom in the Celtic world, to actually go to the shore to pray, remembering that sort of liminal meeting between the waters of our origin and the land of our habitation, but these liminal places that point to the coming together of what can so often seem opposite, heaven and earth, spirit and matter, the divine and the human. And let's keep making sure that we're knowing a wellness in us in response to meditative disciplines and practices. Let's not do things just because they've been done in our tradition. Let's make sure that we are prepared to let go of things that are not feeding our body and soul wellness.
Awesome. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, John Philip, for this time, this conversation. We so appreciate you joining us today, and are so grateful for your teachings and helping us all along in our leg of the Great Search, giving us vocabulary for what that Great Search might be. You can find copies of John Philip's book, The Great Search, wherever you find your books, and if you are like me, more of it will be underlined than not. I'd also like to thank everybody who's here joining us today and who encounters this online. We're going to be posting a video of this conversation on the Looking Within Center YouTube page and Facebook pages. We'll also be releasing an audio version of this as part of the Sandbox Cooperative podcast. I really want to encourage you, when you have a moment, to check out the Looking Within Center webpage, lookingwithincenter.com. You'll find a link to this video. It'll be there shortly. But also, you'll find many other contemplative practices, resources for individuals and groups, and different conversations, 40-day journeys, all kinds of different things that you'll find at that website. So you can check that out. Looking Within Center seeks to change the world from the inside out. And finally, on behalf of the Sandbox Cooperative and the Looking Within Center, we just want to thank you for joining us. And until next time, we'll see you.
Bye.